Hello and welcome to Maestros and Sirens of Video Game Music at EGX Digital 2020. I'd like to start off by introducing our panel. First up, we have BAFTA-nominated South by Southwest Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Award winner Gareth Coker, whose works include Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori and Will of the Wisps, Ark, In Momentum, and is currently working on Halo Infinite. His siren is Aeralie Brighton, vocalist and composer, who's worked with Gareth on both of these titles. Aeralie has also worked with Inon on Black Sad, Under the Skin, Siberia 3, and Eagle Flight. Next up, we have two-time Ivor Novello-winning composer Joris de Man. The Ivor Novellos were for Killzone 2 and Horizon Zero Dawn. His work can also be found in Velocity and Planet Coaster. His siren is Julie Elven, soundtrack and film score vocalist and multi-instrumentalist. She featured on Horizon Zero Dawn and is currently working with Joris on Horizon Zero Dawn 2, Horizon Forbidden West. Julie has contributed to other games soundtracks such as League of Legends, World of Warcraft, and Hearthstone. Finally, we have Emmy Award-winning composer Inon Zur, whose works include The Elder Scrolls, Fallout 4, Fallout 4 Far Harbor, Soul Calibur, The Lord of the Rings, Dragon Age, and Rift. His siren is Mimi Page, not only a singer, but songwriter, sound designer, and composer. Her music can be found on other titles, She Dreams of Elsewhere and The Lighthouse. She's worked with Inon so far on Fallout 4, Fallout Harbor, and loads of other games, including Durango, Ubisoft's Eagle Flight, and Rift. Mimi has also worked with Gareth Coker on The Unspoken. And finally, hello, I'm Adele Cutting. I'm an audio director in the games industry and run audio outsourcing company Soundcuts. So let's get started. So first up, I want to ask, because there's lots of cross-pollination between you all, how did you all meet? How did you meet your, all the different partners you've worked with? Let's go for you, Joris.
Silence as we all wait to go first. So I was looking for a singer for Ori, and I wanted someone that wouldn't that wasn't just a session singer who would come in and just do the job. I wanted someone with a voice that just felt different. And also, and this is kind of a common thing for everyone on the first Ori game, is that we were all kind of struggling. Like, it was my first big soundtrack. The co-founders had left very, very well-paying jobs in corporate gaming with big companies to set up this small company. So like, everyone was just kind of like, it was very the mentality was very startup. And I found Aeralie, and she was fairly new on the scene. But I found her on YouTube, and then we met up after discovering that we only lived like 15-20 minutes away from each other, and I can't remember what the first track we did. I think it was actually a trailer track that we actually never used, but it was like, it actually formed the basis for everything that came after that. I think that's what happened.
Yeah. You've got quite a few credits on the game. You're down as a language consultant, and you actually play two of the characters, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in Ori, I was actually in the process of the music stuff. I was asked, like, hey, do you voice act? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? And I've never done anything professionally before, ever. It was always just kind of for fun. So that was interesting. And I just started helping to develop a language. And so I play Sign, the little ball of light. And It was really cool because I got to help create this bank of words, and they would kind of piece everything together. So that was really, really fun.
What did the voice represent in the music? Was that also linked to the character when you wrote the tracks, Gareth?
Wow, I mean, I remember when we first put Aeralie's voice into the game and I presented that to the team, I think the first thing that they saw was the opening sequence, Ori Lost in the Storm. And we were like, okay, where else can we put Aeralie? And initially we were like, let's, because the voice is really unique and it's very powerful, and we tend to use it in the most dramatic moments of the game. We did try it during like regular gameplay, but because the voice is so powerful and meaningful, and it's deeply connected to Ori, you really focus on it. And so during the gameplay, when there's so much else going on screen, like it's visual overload, it's animation overload, we wanted to use the voice when the player is passive and watching a cutscene or watching an in-game scene play out. So yeah, on both games, yes, I think it's pretty much exclusively used for cutscenes and dramatic moments, because Aeralie's voice is quite dramatic.
Really?
It's incredibly spiritual in the game, isn't it? I was really fascinated to find out that you'd actually done the voice work as well. You know, I thought, yeah, those what they sign and Sear,
yeah.
They're West too. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just really spiritual. So I did wonder if there was a connection. So Joris, how did you find Julie?
Yeah, it was quite an interesting process because one of the first things I had to write for the game was actually the trailer, which had to feature a main theme, which is quite a daunting thing to get into when you start on a project, because usually you kind of want to keep that towards the end because you've had some time to sort of develop some sense of what the game is about. And it was quite a strange process. I'd written this main melody, and I contacted a friend of mine and basically asked him, his name's Ian Livingston, he's also a composer, and said, do you know sort of good female vocalists? And he just, at that time, happened to be doing a session with Julie. And so I kind of just sort of trailed onto that session and said, well, can you do a quick vocal take on this just to get an idea, like a scratch vocal? And to be honest, I think even the scratch vocal, I think most of that ended up in the actual trailer, which just immediately sort of struck a chord, and it really fits. And it's a funny one because on one hand you could say, well, choosing a female vocalist for a game with a female protagonist isn't the most original thing to come up with, but it just seemed to fit really well, and it was just such a distinct style of singing that I hadn't really heard before in it. So it was immediately we realized that we were onto something.
Yeah, I think listening to the soundtrack, what I really like about it is it almost sounds, even though you're not saying words, just your vocal inflections make it sound like there are words in there. I thought that was really interesting. Is that something that you do use a lot?
So I do write lyrics on some games, but in this game it was without any pre-written lyrics by Joris. So I think you always gave me a lot of creative freedom in this way. So it's kind of like developing a phonetic kind of signature, maybe you could say, that kind of represents Aloy's empathy and vulnerability, but also her strength. So it was nothing that I would just write down and be like, oh, this I should do in this very part, but it was more intuitive and more like feeling into the music. And the thing about Joris' music is that it's I feel it's very emotionally descriptive. So I just had to listen to his instrumental music, and then I already knew kind of the emotions that Aloy would experience in this very moment. So yes,
so
it was
did
more
you
like an improvised language.
Did you know where the tracks were going to be played in the game? Were you given information on the setting of the track? To give you more.
Yeah, so for the very first track we did together, it was for the E3 trailer in 2015, as Joris mentioned. And actually, I didn't know that it would end up in the trailer. I think you didn't know either, right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was a test originally, just to see, because I was kind of just suggesting, saying, I think this could really do with like a female vocal, and it was, that thing of, on one hand it's a bit obvious, but I think it's really going to work. And the trailer was very, a lot happened in the trailer, and a lot of sort of things developed in the trailer, because you're sort of, it's a new franchise, so you're trying to introduce people to this new world, and you're going to draw them in. So that the trailer did a very good job of sort of introducing you to something where initially the world is presented as, this is sort of this post-apocalyptic thing, and people kind of go, oh yeah, I know where this is going, and then suddenly you're sort of, this vista is revealed, and it's much greener and much sort of more nature-based than you would expect, and suddenly there's these big robots, and then you kind of go, oh, hang on, this is different. So it had quite a distinct role, and yeah, just sort of establishing that main theme was such an important part of establishing the franchise, to sort of, you know, come in quite a big way to sort of say, well, this is new, this is exciting, and this is something quite different to what the studio has done before.
Yeah.
And that was a challenge within the project itself as well, because I wasn't, you know, Gorilla said as well, you're not sort of the logical choice of this, because we've done Killzone with You, which is like big orchestral stuff, and this is sort of the opposite of that. We want you to do the extreme opposite of this. So instead of big orchestras, lots of musicians, we actually wanted to keep it really small and very personal. This is a game and it's got big, you know, dinosaur robots, but really it's actually quite a personal story, and really it's the story of Aloy and how she progresses and how she develops, and the secret behind what this whole Horizon Zero Dawn business means. So it had to sort of needed quite a different approach, and I kind of struck gold with Julie, really, because she sort of got it. And I think this is sort of part of the bigger conversation, you know, when you work with musicians, is that some musicians really need very descriptive guidance as to what you want them to do and a particular playing style. But I think, you know, as we sort of spoken about before, is that we're sort of working with a very distinct group of people that aren't just vocalists, but are actually sort of musicians and collaborators that really bring something extra to the table. It's not just having a vocalist, it's actually having someone who's a partner and a collaborator in this process, and to figure out where these melodies are going to go and how they're going to be performed, and the way these melodies are performed is, I think, is a very distinct part of the soundtrack.
Yeah. So moving on to Inon, going from one idea of post-apocalyptic to a different idea of post-apocalyptic, we'll go to Fallout 4. I mean, obviously, you and Mimi have worked together on multiple titles. And one of the things I find, which is good to have Fallout 4 in the mix, is the use of voice is very different on Fallout 4. I think because the music, I mean, as a sound designer, I love the music because it's very sound design focused, almost electroacoustic. Is that how would you class it? Yeah, electroacoustic music. Yeah. So the use of voice, I mean, it's very different, isn't it? It's not pure voice. It's been processed and manipulated for the music.
Exactly. Well, again, Fallout is a very different animal, and like coming from games like Dragon Age or Eagle Flight, where, you know, you let the voice really sort of like being featured. This in Fallout, the voice became sort of like an instrument inside the whole soundscape. And this is also the reason why I've chosen Mimi, because she has this amazing quality of blending in, but in the same time giving the music very, very unique feature and flavor. And in this track that I think I sent you, Adele, I think it's basically really illustrating exactly what I wanted to pronounce there. It was, you know, in Far Harbor, when you enter and everything is so foggy, and you're not in an immediate danger, and you just enjoy this weird beauty of this surreal world. And Mimi's voice captured that so beautifully because it is so surreal, and she really blended in perfectly.
Yeah, it really seems to come out of some of the other sounds in the score. It just suddenly evolves out of some of the other sound design pieces. I think it sounds absolutely beautiful. Yeah, the piece you're referring to is "Song for the Fog," just so that people can go off and listen to that one.
What was so fun about that was I didn't know it was Fallout until I showed up for the session, because I'm such a huge fan of the series. So Inon said, "I have a surprise for you. Come to the studio." And so I just came, and he was like, "Today we're going to work on Fallout 4. I was like, "No, oh my gosh, biggest fan of the game." So it was so fun. And immediately, what was so great, we've worked on so many mystical, ethereal light projects that this was more the horror and the haunting. So I got to play more of the darker aspects of this character. And so we had the idea of the siren calling and luring in people. So it was beautiful and sweet, but dark and ominous. And so we were playing with character work in the studio. So we were really developing the emotion of it and then stacking harmony after harmony with tons of reverb. And Inon, my Valhalla shimmer that I'm always like, let's use this reverb on it. So we had this big cloud-like thing. So we were really sound designing together in that session.
So you were recording with the processors on, so that you could actually hear what it was.
Well, no, I mean,
like.
Yes, actually, I always give her like quite a lot of Valhalla, so she'll feel at home.
Yeah.
But the thing about Fallout and the way it works, because it is such a, I wouldn't say off game, but things are always not the way they seem to be, and there's always something off there and crooked and a little sinister. But it's not like, horror game. It's just things are a bit off because of all this nuclear, horrendous thing that happened there. So Mimi sang totally in tune, but all the instruments around her, I detuned them a little bit. And basically what that created, it created sort of like this wavy sound that seems to be like, first you're like on a boat, because you're most of the time in Fire Harbor on a boat and you're just like going, and then things are so beautiful but also dangerous.
Awesome. So Joris, you mentioned about collaboration. So this is open to all the composers with your respective Sirens. What did they bring to the pot, so to speak, that you think maybe if you'd have chosen a different artist, they wouldn't necessarily have done? I'll start with Gareth. Oh no, Joris. Go for it.
Sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it, Joris.
Going to go.
Thank you. I think some of it is really to do with the phrasing, but it's also to do with just the vocal quality. In that, in the same way that instruments, even if you have like 2 or 3 different violin players, the way they play their instrument and the instrument they might be using, and the combination of all of those things and their own musicality will still mean that those could sound really, really different. And I think it's the same with vocalists, is that, Julie's just got a very particular way of phrasing things and sort of when she uses vowels, the particular vowels that she picks and the way she interprets melodies. And I think interpretation is such an important part of this whole process. Is you give someone a melody, but what they do with that melody and how they interpret it, you can really tell if you've got a good musician and you give them something, is that they don't just play the melody, but they run with it, and it becomes something else. It becomes a sort of an added factor to it, where you're not just getting played back exactly what you put in, but you get something extra. And that's really, for me, is what working with Julie adds, is that I know when I have we often work remotely, so it really is a case of I send her something and then she'll send me something back. We don't work in a way where I'm sort of at the session and I'm sort of massaging the performance. So actually, I send her something, and then it's always a bit like Christmas. You get something back, and it's like, oh, what am I going to get back this time? And it's quite an exciting process to hear what you're going to get back. And so I think that's a big part of it for me.
And in return, I felt that it was just amazing to have this trust by you and to have this freedom of just trying things out. And I knew that it was wanted from your side that I just try things out, and that was just a very beautiful process.
I can piggyback off on that now, because what's fun about this, I think Aeralie knows what's coming, is that my approach is kind of the opposite. I'd written the theme for Orien, and it was pretty much like everyone in the team was happy with it. And I remember when Aeralie came to record it, and she was doing all of the cool stuff that I think Joris is talking about, all the little inflections, all the phrasing, and I'm like, no, None of that. Just sing the damn notes. The melody will take care of you. And
no,
then,
I can do it.
Right. She wanted to do all of the stuff that she loves doing. I didn't let her do, but then she can talk about this. But then eventually we got to the end credits track, and it's probably the anthem for the game now, Light of Nibel, and that was where she could unleash finally.
I think he really just got tired of me like begging.
I just gave in. Yeah, exactly.
It was funny because when we got to the end credits, he's like, fine, just do whatever you're gonna do. And it ended up being one of the really cool ones because I got to say, cool, I can finally show like this different side of my voice, because sometimes I think the simplest stuff is the hardest to do because it is just so simple. And just to get back to the basics, I think a lot of times you get sucked into getting to do the painting and stuff, and that for me that was really exciting and new to have to strip my voice down.
Well, one of the reasons I did that is because I chose you for the tone quality of your voice, and I was like, I didn't want any of the extra stuff. Like I wanted just the tone, which is the thing that what I heard. Although actually most of the material that I'd heard you sing in was really like loud, and I'm like, what would happen if we made that voice like tone quiet? And that's obviously the result that we got. But I also think it's fitting for the story. And when you get to the end credits for the first time, like your voice has a sense of freedom in the end credits, which is also kind of reflective of what happens in the story as well. So I guess I can take credit for it, even though it was maybe unintentional, that it was by design, not really, no. But it ended up working out great.
So was that an Ori?
Let me add to what Gareth said, because this is actually, I think, the essence of the whole thing. Yes, you can do a lot with your voice, but one of the reasons why we are choosing this specific singer for a specific project is what Gareth said. It's the actual voice. And, these three amazing singers had such a different voice and timbre. And it's so great when you work on the project and you could imagine yourself like, and it's like, wow, that could be perfect for this singer. And it's not about like a great ability or singing in tune or even composing. It's just bringing this quality of the pure voice, which sometimes really makes it the whole thing happen.
Yeah, it's a lot about character, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difficulty, and that's where some of our sort of collaboration aspect comes in, because we had some of that on Horizon as well. Is that you have the tracks where the voice features and where it's the main instrument, and then you have the tracks where actually it is part of the instrumentation, but it's not the featured instrument. And those are sort of quite interesting conversations to have. It's like, no, actually, this is a piece where. And there's like a couple of tracks on Horizon, the bad news, the good news. They're sort of pretty important tracks that do a lot of exposition in the game that you sort of hear when there's actually some really big plot points. So when you've got a really important plot point, you don't want someone sort of wading over the top because you get distracted. So it's got to be sort of blend more in the background. And still you want that sort of, in that instance, it was sort of, we needed quite a sort of sorrowful, sad character to it. But it didn't need to be in front, and so it was sort of mixing it further in the back and still have a part of it. And that sort of a really delicate balance is like, okay, these are the bits we can really let rip and do your thing, and actually these are the bits where I actually just need you to be, as Inon said, sort of more that sort of pure, simple, or actually as Gareth said as well, that pure, simple quality where I just need the voice, I don't need the big performance, I just need that quality in the background that still gives that bit of emotion without sort of, punching you in the face with it.
I'm interested because all of you have worked. Oh, sorry, go for it, Julie.
I just wanted to add that, yes, similarly to what Aeralie said, it was very interesting in those parts to strip your voice a bit back and not be so soloistic about everything. And you could say it like that. And I felt it was very interesting also to really feel into this world that Aloy is experiencing, because I felt every time my voice came in, it was kind of connecting to different experiences that Aloy has. So every time she has, every time something changes in her world, or every time she has a very emotional situation, my voice would come in. But sometimes it would just be more like a little reminder, and sometimes it would be full out. So yeah.
Well, that's sort of what I was just about to say is all of you have worked on sort of like sequels. So Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori Will of the Wisps, and Horizon Zero Dawn, and then Forbidden West. And so how has the voice changed? Because Gareth, you were saying in the first one you wanted it very straight, and then on the last track, Aeralie was just finally able to go free. So in Will of the Wisps, how did that change? Did you start free and then move in a different direction? Did the character of the voice change?
It's actually kind of like that, to be honest, because the tone at the beginning of the game, without wishing to spoil too much, because still a bunch of people haven't played it, the tone at the beginning of the second game is very, very uplifting, certainly compared with the tone of the first game's opening. But then I would say, I mean, the game is quite relentlessly dark, almost all the way through. The tone of the game is very, very different. I remember it was something that we wrestled with for a while at the studio. It's like, how can we make sure that we have some peaks and valleys? It's more like a continuation of the story, and it's really where we decide to use voice in the game is always dependent on, at least for me, dependent on what is happening in the story. But it's maybe worth pointing out, and again, I have to do this without spoiling the game, but Aeralie is the first and very last thing that people hear across both of the two Ori games, which I think is kind of cool.
So do you feel, Aeralie, as you contributed to both Ori games, did you feel, I don't know, did you develop your style? Do you feel you really took it somewhere else in the second one?
I can't take full credit for that, because I feel like the tone and everything, what makes Ori through 1 and 2 so amazing is all these artists coming together, and it kind of evolves into its own thing. So I think just having worked with Gareth, it kind of evolved organically, you know, and I found throughout this whole process, even though there's different tones and different storylines and there's different elements of light and dark, essentially I was the alpha and omega of the life force of the both games. So it kind of melded all together.
That's a very good way of putting it, yeah.
And what about Joris and Julie for Horizon Zero Dawn? Because obviously Aloy's story, you know, it felt like it sort of like reached a conclusion, and now obviously we haven't played it, but is this something that you're playing with, you know, changing some of the voice styles to match the narrative?
Well, I can only talk about the trailer at the moment, which is the Forbidden West trailer, unfortunately. So it was more of a sort of a reminder, really, in that it's not exactly the same theme, and we really struggled with that for a while. Is you know, because there was from the directors a really clear point of saying this is a new game, so we don't want to necessarily go back to the original theme of the original game, because we don't want people to think that this is like a DLC. This is a new project. It stands on its own, and tonally and in terms of music. There has been a bit of a shift in that there's a bit more of an influence of sort of synth / electronica sounds. I can't say too much about it at the moment, but there is some shift in how the music is approached for the new game, or for the trailer, I should say. But I think more than anything, we realized that we couldn't really get away from at least having some of the melody in there.
Well, it sort of is iconic now, isn't it? I mean, people sing it. It's a standalone.
Yeah. It's one of those things that you can't really get away from. So even though it's not exactly the same melody, there was quite a particular point in the trailer when it comes in, and that particular point was like a big sort of sticking point as to it has to be at this point, and the melody has to be somewhat in there for people to really sort of be reconnected with Aloy and whatever's going to happen next. So yeah, there is. You'd be surprised at how many conversations, how much thought goes into that sort of thing. Not just as a composer, but actually from from the directors and from the game directors. There's actually quite a lot of thought that goes into that, which sort of surprised me. And that normally that's something that's left to the composers, but in this instance, there were quite a few big discussions about when exactly that was going to come in and how that melody was going to be used. So
awesome! It's a shame it's not out yet.
Yes,
I thought you were just give us a world premiere moment there.
oh, I wish I could.
So Mimi and Inon, how did the vocals change between Fallout and Fallout Far Harbor?
Well, again, the whole evolution of Fallout is basically, because Mimi didn't work on Fallout 3, but there was like a big journey, and it started very, very bleak, and then it ended up actually quite more uplifting, as much as uplifting Fallout could be. So Mimi was brought on where, the actual uplifting part, started. And we really didn't want to change so much of like what the tradition Fallout game music was. What we really wanted to do is to add like this special flavor that I almost like let Mimi decide what that should be. And I remember when we recorded, I told her, okay, so this is the music, it's done, I didn't write a part for her at all. All I told her is, okay, you need to add this new color to it, so it will be the next evolution of the Fallout game. And this is what she did, right, Mims?
Yes, it was so fun. I love working with you in this way because we work with emotion a lot. And so picking haunting and ominous and dark, but also gentle and sweet, and having this hybrid of light and dark, and then tapping into different textures of my voice and just playing with harmonies and layering things that were contrasting, but then also blending and creating chords just on the fly and letting anything just fly through. That was so fun and creative and playful. And it ended up just writing itself in, I think, a couple hours because we just let it flow, which was really, really fun.
Yep.
Because you've worked on multiple games together. So is that the sort of like the same process for each of these games?
Well, for example, on Eagle Flight, that was a little different because here I really scripted the melody, both for Mimi and Aeralie. Each one of them was such a different, obviously, track. But this was a place where the voice totally had its own place. And it actually led the whole thing, unlike Fallout. Or for example, in Dragon Age, when we actually wrote songs for the game, and this was where the voice was featured. So the unique thing about Fallout is I'm using the voice as not even an instrument, but it's just a color that is being added on top of the score, and that's what it actually ends up to be.
Great stuff. And one thing that really comes across when you're all talking is the fact that you all seem to really like each other and get along. Is that really important as part of the relationship, that you have this camaraderie and you totally trust in the other person?
It's totally, no, sure,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Julie.
I just need to say, I think it's really important because we're in this very collaborative kind of team spirit industry. So it's never really like one person does it all, but it's oftentimes a huge team of different people. That's what I wanted to say. Yes.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the fact that, these singers are also composers on their own, and they could add the flavor. You have to have strong relationships with them, because, you know, the emotions that are going through these sessions, it's not just like, oh, play that, or here's the music, just do that. No, this is really a mutual working process. So you have to have a good and solid and, you know, warm relationships with your collaborator on that, and trust, obviously.
I think one of the elements that comes into play too is that when you endeavor on these journeys and you move forward together, there's this element of vulnerability, because you're trying to show your best talent and tell this story together. So it's almost bringing in this element of acting too, because you draw on these real life experiences, and you have to develop this trust with each other. And I think what makes all of this music so impactful and powerful and moving is that it's authentic. It's something that you've built together, and I feel some of the most beautiful stuff is authentic because it's real. You feel it. It's something tangible in your heart, and I think, you know, that comes from trusting your team and feeling safe in your environment. So it's inevitable that you cultivate these relationships with people to make beautiful art.
I can piggyback on that, because I remember for Blind Forest, we had to do the ending, and I'd not handled an ending before, and I remember, I think there was like 20 minutes to go before Aeralie arrived on my doorstep. I didn't have anything, literally nothing, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to give her, but obviously at that time Ori was more of a known quantity. We'd worked on some tracks already, and this, I think, is actually the second to last track that we were doing. It's the Sacrifice on the soundtrack, and yeah, didn't have a clue, but Ori had become very personal to both of us, and obviously we'd gotten to know each other very well, and that was a case where, for whatever reason, just having Aeralie in the room was the spark that I needed, mainly because it's like, maybe it's just because I was embarrassed to not have anything for her to sing when she got here. But then she did get here, and honestly, the solution to me, it's almost so crude, the solution for the ending. But I look back at it now, I wouldn't change a thing. It's literally the main theme in a major key, which you never hear at any point in the rest of the game. It's sometimes the simplest solution. It doesn't reveal itself until very late on, and I think, and as a result of that, we've got the video in front of us. We're sitting in the room together. We're watching it together, and it's not that it's not so much writing together. It's even just talking about a scene together can spring the ideas off. And I think it's fairly safe to say that the Sacrifice it's probably like the high point emotionally of the game, because there's such a massive switch in terms of like what happens at the end. Like that, I think for Aeralie, that was probably emotionally the most challenging piece of music to record, even though on the notes on the page are actually very, very simple. Sorry, yes.
Oh no, I was just saying I was crying.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Is that, because that's what I found when we were working on Horizon as well, is that the conversation becomes a lot less about the notes and a lot more about the emotional content and the emotional, the sort of the feelings that you're trying to reach for. And that's sort of what I ended up doing with Julie a lot was I'd just send her a little, often would just be like a piano, basically the score and then just the melody as a piano, which is, for in terms of vocal inflection, doesn't really give you much. But I would write a little email saying, this is what happens in this scene, and this is what happens at this point, this is what happens at that point, so that there was some sort of emotional context to what we were doing. And I think, at least I like to think, maybe Julie thought, oh, what's that shit? But I'd like to think that was much more useful than saying, oh, and then on this note, I want you to do that, and then on this note, I want you to do that, because it's almost like that's a given. It's actually, if you've got the right feeling and you're in the right sort of emotional frame of mind, then that will happen anyway. I don't need to tell you how to sing. I just need you to convey this particular emotion that we're looking for in this scene.
Yeah, and I actually love that. So just for the record, I love that you gave me this freedom to interpret it just with the emotion. So, and I think that comes back to what you said about vulnerability, that you can just open up and really feel into the character you're kind of singing for. And yeah, so totally, absolutely. And you really have to trust the process in this way.
Yeah.
Awesome. All for this to all the ladies. I mean, you've all worked in other mediums apart from games. Is there anything different or better that's about working in games than these other? Is it different working with these games composers or?
I feel like the gaming industry in particular is it's a smaller, tight-knit community. Therefore, I think we work better together as a team. I found that even with vocalists, we're very supportive of one another because we know the struggles, not only as a singer, but, as an independent contractor. There's no union to represent us, and so it's kind of we help uplift each other. I mean, Julie and I have shared warm-ups together. It's just working together to help one another, because we know like when somebody has a good reputation and you're associated with them, then they have a good reputation. It rubs off on each other. So I think I particularly enjoy the gaming industry for that fact. It's more camaraderie, and you really feel like you're a part of a team.
Totally, absolutely. And I also feel it's a very inventive industry, so there's a lot of room for experimentation and new names. Well, at least I feel this way. So yeah, totally love it as well. Mimi, what would you say?
I love this art form so much just as a gamer myself. So to be able to play something that I'm a part of or that my friends are a part of is unlike anything else, like in, the pop world or the EDM world, where yes, there's concerts and live settings, but to be in a game and in an art form that I enjoy playing and I'm swimming in joy, that's what I love. I love having fun. And so I really treat my work in video games as a place to play. So that's my favorite part about this process.
Just on top of that, I think one of the most intrinsically rewarding parts of this is not the process itself, but getting to watch people's joy from something that you helped create. Like, wow, talk about leaving a legacy and impact. That's forever commemorated in time, and it gives you purpose. I think it's amazing.
I think it's quite amazing when you've worked on a game, and obviously you work in isolation. It's not like when you work on a film and you see the billboards and see people queuing up to go into the cinema. But then when you look at how many sales and you think that many people have played it in their living room, it's kind of really amazing.
Yeah, and you also see all their Instagram stories and Let's Plays and stuff like that. And just me seeing my favorite German Let's Play YouTuber, his name is Gronk. I just saw him play Horizon Zero Dawn, and I watched all 80 episodes. And just him humming the theme, he hummed the theme, and he was like, he was like, oh, that's great. And I was just, so these moments are just priceless, I feel.
So I've got two more questions. The first one is to the ladies again. You all have very different styles in the way that you sing. So do you ever experiment and sort of like listen to somebody else's style and you go, oh, I'm going to give that a shot?
I think just for me personally, I really enjoy listening to techniques that people do, but I find that I try to have this core sound and I try to experiment with different things, but ultimately, like I said earlier, authenticity is key. And what makes us so unique is that we are independently strong in who we are, and we have that indelible style. So, I think it would do us a disservice to try to copy or emulate somebody else. But there's always something new to learn. There's always some technique to hone. So I definitely don't ever stop striving to be better. So in that sense, yes, I'll listen I have a few vocal coaches that I work with, and, it's always just kind of referencing, things that inspire us and what would I like to, how can I better myself? So in that element, yes, I pull on different techniques.
Yeah.
That was perfectly said. I feel the exact same way. I love honing my own craft, being inspired by others, but then knowing my own true sound, how to evolve that sound and expand upon that, and then just contributing in that way, but definitely incorporating in my own way other artists that I'm inspired by.
Most definitely. And I feel the unique sounds that we have many, they actually brought us to where we are today. So actually, I feel, especially in cinematic music and media music, it's such an advantage to have some kind of unique qualities that maybe in classical music wouldn't be wanted at all. For example, my voice is very breathy in the high register. And my classical teacher would always be like, oh, it's so breathy. But then again, you just have to find your niche. And I feel, since this is a very niche kind of way to create music, we are very prepared to have our own style. And as you guys said so beautifully, it's still so beautiful to just be inspired. For example, I'm inspired by both of your works on Ori and on Fallout. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And my final question was for the composers, really, which is every single one of these soundtracks is unique. And if you were to go into a different room and you weren't to see the visuals and you heard the soundtrack, you could tell the game it was from. How do you feel about that? Is something is that really important to you, that your soundtrack is completely on its own?
Of course. I mean, basically, I think that it's the main goal. You really want to create something that will be iconic for the game. And for me, this was sort of like an ongoing mission. And I feel that throughout my 20-something years career in the game business, I always tried to sort of like evolve and to develop and to tap into new styles, because this is, in the end of the day, this is what people are looking for. They're looking for two things. They're looking for something to hone in, to feel connected, but also they're looking for something that they never heard before. And the combination between these two, the familiar, so you could really get connected, and the new, which is the more original and iconic, is what makes, I think, in many ways, a game score and any score successful.
Yeah, there's not much to add to that. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because at least for me, it's always when you're working on something that you're always there's always that sort of nagging doubt in your mind. Am I doing something that is original? Is this good enough? Is this going to work? And it takes getting through it and coming out on the other side and seeing people's responses to it to kind of go, actually, yeah, that worked out all right. It's sometimes really hard to see when you're creating it. You're trying to do something different. It's nice. I think all these three projects are projects where I think you get pushed quite a lot as a composer, because you got to come up with something that's original. You can't sort of depend on maybe some of the palettes and some of the composition styles that you're more comfortable in. These projects sort of demand a particular style and a particular way of composing that really pushes you. But I think the end result is that you end up with something that is hopefully original and hopefully memorable.
I think I'll qualify that by saying, like, I think in order to create that kind of signature sound, you do need the platform to be able to create a signature sound. Like, not every game needs a soundtrack like Ori, and not every like the games that we're talking about, Fallout has a style that's being cultivated by Inon now. It's like, and as you said, we hear it and we know it, and it's the same with Horizon. But like the two things that I think we're all looking for is, there's kind of two distinct ways to me to at least make your thing identifiable, and it's palette and it's melody. And if you're lucky, you get to do both in a game, because some scores do not call for a big melody. And just to piggyback on like what the lady said about, especially what Aeralie said about, not spending too much time listening to other artists. With respect to Inon and Joris, I don't spend hardly any time listening to other soundtracks because I know that those other soundtracks have been incredibly deeply researched, and I don't want to be informed by someone else's research. I want to know what Joris listened to get inspired by Horizon. So that's more interesting to me. So I've often ended up in Spotify and YouTube black holes, like looking for music. Like I want to find out what inspired the creation of another soundtrack, because it's usually like you usually end up just listening to really weird stuff. It's like one of my top tips I give people is like, stop listening to soundtracks. Like it's okay to listen to soundtracks like in your spare time and all of that stuff, but when you're like looking for the sound for your new projects, like it's the last thing I listen to. If I listen to any soundtracks at all. But it is, as Inon said, it is what you strive for, and I think it's what every developer wants. But getting there requires a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and growth within the team. It just requires a lot of failure. And one of the things that I'm very grateful to Moon Studios for is encouragement to fail and for things to not work. Because not every developer lets you fail. And sometimes there isn't time to fail, so you fall back onto the stuff that you know will work. And I think, I can't speak for the other composers, but I think in all our cases on these respective projects, we were given the space and time and freedom to explore and come up with this stuff. And that's incredibly liberating.
Totally.
And also, you're all incredibly lucky because you had fantastic sort of like fabric to put the music on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's, I think Gareth made a really good point there, because it's of course it's the projects that demand this kind of sound, this kind of research, and this kind of development, but it's also developers being risky, and I think some developers aren't as risky as they think they are. And they say they want something really new and really different, but you realize that when you actually give them that, they kind of go, oh, actually, that's a bit further out.
Edgy. How many times have you seen the adjective edgy? What does that even mean? That means just because they want it to sound new, but then they don't. Yeah.
And it's that tricky balance. And I think these are the kind of projects that we've been all very fortunate to work on, where they really meant it, and you really did get to go somewhere else and say, well, what about this? What about that? And sort of try these new ways and new styles of working. And thankfully had the developers to sort of go, let's go there and let's see what happens.
So before we wrap up, does anybody have any final thoughts they want to impart to the audience? No, everybody's good.
Thank you for the support.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you so much.
Well, I was going to say thank you very much to you guys. So thank you, Mimi, Gareth, Aeralie, Joris, Julie, and Inon. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. And I think Gareth was on something, and I want to see Spotify playlists to associate with composers, just to do some research. I think that'd be brilliant. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.